Hey, today I am going to talk about the 5 stages of the Holocaust in World War II. So these are kind of the 5 basic things that happened throughout the Holocaust, and the progression of things. So it's starting with propaganda, and then stripping of rights, segregation, concentration camps, and then finally extermination camps. So the first stage was propaganda, and this would be kind of at the before the war and the outside of the war. Europe has a long history of some anti-Semitism in different points of time. So this was just kind of building upon this and using it for a specific purpose. So Nazi propaganda was made to make Jewish people look like they were war hungry. So the poster you see there says up top, the Jew, warmonger, warlonger. So just making the German people think that Jewish people wanted war. There were lots of other nasty racist stereotypes as well that they used. So this here says, or this is I'm not sure if it's from a book or a poster or something like that, but it mixed an anti-drug campaign with anti-Semitism. This was a children's book, right? So just as poisonous mushrooms are often difficult to tell from good mushrooms, it is often difficult to recognize the Jews and the confidence tricksters and criminals. Yikes. So this children's book was saying, like, hey, some mushrooms will kill you. Also, some people are Jewish, which means that they're bad. And this was the idea that they were trying to get across to everybody, including the children. It's pretty, yeah, not great. So next stage is the stripping of rights. So in 1935, so this is before World War II, by about 4 years, these were laws in Germany that stripped Jewish people of German citizenship, so they couldn't be citizens anymore. They got fired from jobs, and businesses that they owned were boycotted. They were banned from German schools and universities. Marriages between Jews and Aryans. So Hitler's idea of like the perfect race of Germans, even though it was kind of a made-up thing. Aryans aren't really so much the real race of people. Anyways, they couldn't intermarry. Forced to carry ID cards. Their passports were stamped with the J. Forced to wear an armband with the yellow Star of David. You can see that up in the corner here. Synagogues were destroyed, and they were forced to pay reparations and a special income tax. So these were all things to take away the rights of Jewish people. And kind of it was just as the propaganda was dehumanizing them, this was another step to dehumanizing them. And this was partially something they did so that the rest of Germany and maybe the rest of the empire that they wanted to have would also hate all the Jewish people. So you had propaganda and then stripping of rights, and now there's segregation. So Jews were forced to move into an area, like areas called ghettos, to isolate them from the rest of society. Ghettos were a thing before this point. I know specifically in this Polandish sort of area, Jews all sort of lived in their own separate spot because they weren't allowed to live anywhere else. But this was kind of weaponizing the ghetto to make sure that they weren't interacting with anybody else. The Nazis established 356 ghettos in Poland, the Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Hungary during World War II. They were gross, They had no sanitation or poor sanitation. They were really overcrowded. Just wasn't a pleasant place to live. And having people so close together and such poor sanitation meant disease spread really easily. And then there wasn't a lot of food, so a lot of people slowly starved to death. Warsaw had the largest ghetto. It held 500,000 people and was only 3.5 square miles in size. So that's a super densely populated area that they were forced into. So next stage, concentration camps. You've already changed everybody's opinions, or that was the goal, and then you take away their rights and you segregate them and then you move them. That was the idea behind the German plan. So this is the next big step. They moved them all into concentration camps, and including communists, gay people, Jehovah's Witnesses, people who didn't like the Nazis. They forced them into slave labor. The idea was annihilation by work, so work them so hard that they die. They were undernourished, some of them starved to death. They were transported in cattle freight cars, so just like they were livestock, they'd be put into these cars and moved along. It wouldn't be very comfortable at all. And the camps were also built on railroad lines so that transport would be efficient. So you get into a camp, all your stuff is taken away. Your head is shaved, you get a tattoo of your, like a number. You had to wear prison uniforms. Men, women, and children were separated. And survival based on like what you could do. So if you were a carpenter, maybe you would survive a little bit better or longer if you were quite strong. And similar to the ghettos, but even more so, these places were unsanitary, disease-ridden, lice-infested, crowded, and inhumane medical experiments were performed on the people in the camps. The final stage of the Holocaust was extermination. So this happened in a couple of different ways. There was, I'm not going to try to say that, but the mobile killing units kind of traveled around with their only purpose was to kill entire Jewish communities, and those had been around in the 30s. Death factories, Nazi extermination camps that were only there for the goal of mass murder. People would be sent there to be killed. And euthanasia programs, Nazis had the policy to eliminate what they called life unworthy of life. So anybody who was mentally or physically challenged, anybody who was a different race, because the idea was that they had the Aryan race and anything else in there would dilute it and make it less worthy. Yeah. And the Nazis had what they called their final solution. So in 1942, people got together, Nazis got together in Berlin to figure out what they were going to do with the Jewish question. That's what they called it. They wanted their complete solution or final solution. And they decided that that would be the complete and mass annihilation and extermination of all the Jews as well as other groups, including the Roma or Gypsies, homosexuals, etc. They used a gas to help them kill people more effectively. Prisoners were sent into gas chambers that were disguised as showers, and they would go in and then they'd get gassed. Up to 8,000 people were gassed per day at Auschwitz-Birkenau, which was the largest death camp. It had 4 gas chambers. Yeah. If you had gold fillings in your teeth, they would take them, melt them down, and the prisoners themselves were actually forced to move dead bodies into the massive crematoriums where they would cremate the remains. By 1945, the Nazis began to dismantle and destroy the crematoriums and the death camps as Allied troops were closing in. So they knew that the Allies were coming, so they destroyed all this stuff. Maybe trying to destroy the evidence, that kind of a thing. Between 1944 and 1945, Nazis ordered marches over long distances of the prisoners. They were being marched towards the death camps, and a bunch of people died in these marches because, of course, they're diseased, they're malnourished. And I don't imagine that people would have been very nice as they were marching them. So mistreated